Last year, Adelita Grijalva made history, becoming the first Latina congresswoman to represent Arizona. And today she makes even more history, becoming the first sitting congressperson to ever be on the Cochise County Sunday Roundtable. Adelita, it's an honor to have you here as our guest.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, absolutely. Let's go back to that point, because you kind of became a household name nationwide when you won your special election, and then Speaker Mike Johnson refused to seat you. He said you said it was because you would have been the vote that would have forced the release of the Epstein files. He said he was just trying to leverage Democrats about the shutdown. But then when the shutdown ends, it's like a watershed moment where virtually unanimously the House and then the Senate votes in this incredible measure of bipartisanship we don't see anymore. And I was just thinking in that moment, if I were Adelita Grijalva, I would think I had some kind of superpower, like you're Moses parting the Red Seas. What was that like for you after all that contention? Then it just boom, it just goes wide open.
I think that it was very telling that the White House, who'd been really opposed to getting this information out, putting Pam Bondi, sort of like trying to block it, Speaker Johnson literally shutting votes down before the shutdown, canceling votes in order to not have a vote. I think the writing was on the wall that if this discharge petition comes forward, even if the White House and the GOP was not supportive of it, it was going to pass because there were enough members on both sides of the aisle that were like, this has to happen. So I think the bipartisanship was there before we forced the vote, but I do think that it's a way for us to show that when the issue is something that the overwhelming number of constituents support, that we can work together, and we should do that more often.
And you've been there 5 months on the ground now. That was an odd example of extreme bipartisanship. But are you saying that there's more bipartisanship there than people maybe see at home, or is it as bad as it looks to us on where we're at?
On most issues, it looks as bad as it is. It's pretty divided. I've had a handful of members of Congress from the other side that have come over just like in the very few, the few weeks right after I was sworn in, just to say, hey, I worked with your dad and we didn't always agree, but, if we can work together on certain issues, I would love to be able to do that. And, I just want to let you know, welcome to Congress. There are 4 Republican representatives that did that. And that to me is very telling of how divisive it is. And also when you look at the number of members of Congress on both sides really that are saying, this is not what I signed up for. Thus far, we have 49 that are not running for re-election. That says something too. I mean, the divisiveness and the sort of attacks back and forth have been really bad for the American people. We can see it in our economy. We can see it in how we're treating each other. And my hope is that I can be part of the group that comes in to sort of do a refresh and say, this is not the way we're going to treat each other, even if we disagree politically, really like vehemently. It's okay for us to disagree, but we have to model what that looks like. So we don't have people in our streets kind of, saying really some hateful, horrible things. And I think that when they see people at the top of our government do that, their elected people do that, that it reinforces that kind of negativity throughout our country.
And so 5 months in, what kind of committees have you been assigned to, and how can those kind of things benefit the people of CD7, which include in Cochise County, Bisbee, Douglas, Palomides?
Yeah, so I'm on natural resources and education and workforce. And I think that both of those are really important to Cochise County. AZCD7 is one of the most diverse congressional districts in the country. And I'm committed to serving the unique needs of each and every one of those communities. And so, one of the first pieces of legislation that we put forward had to do with protecting tribal sovereignty. And if you look at the kinds of proposals that we put in through appropriations, there's 4 projects, big projects that are specifically for Cochise. One with the Chiricahua medical facility for diabetes, almost 690,000 for the Copper Queen Library, infrastructure and water. I mean, those are the things that were brought forward to me, and I'm just trying to make it as I want to reinforce the local solutions for problems that the federal government can help with.
And touching on that, you mentioned Chiricahua health. Rural health in general is a big issue. kind of in a political sense, a way for Democrats to kind of reach out to rural, typically Republican voting people. What are you seeing out there in terms of rural health? Is it as bad as because I kind of see most of the times with Democrats, it's kind of a crying wolf. Sometimes it's like the sky is falling. It's like, and then people don't see the disaster around. But how bad is it out there, and what's the sense you're getting from your constituents?
You know, we look at the cuts to Medicaid, like 30%. That's going to be really devastating to our rural communities. 30%, and if you look at those cuts and then equate that to people, 30% of the people in Cochise County rely on Medicare. So that to me, and Medicaid, those cuts are going to have a ripple effect when you look at the reduction in funds for rural health communities, you know, and the number of people. I think that the estimates that I saw for Arizona were about 67% of people did not sign up or renew their ACA because of the increased cost. Where are those people going to go for health services? They're going to go to the systems like I do, like El Rio Health, like Chiricahua Health, like Mariposa Health. Those are all those systems that are going to get overwhelmed because they are right there. Very shortly, I feel like, and all of the groups that have talked to me said, you know, we are very close to being in the red. And once these cuts are fully implemented, we foresee that there's no way for us to keep our doors open. That's very scary. Really.
Yeah, I mean, the counter, I guess, that the Republicans would have, including your counterpart, Juan Ciscomani, would say that all the money that was apportioned to rural health in the One Big Beautiful Bill is able to be a stopgap. Does those numbers not add up? Or
they don't, because if you look at just in rural Arizona hospitals, there are 5. They're Page, Winslow, Bisbee, Globe, Nogales. They are the ones that are close to being threatened, and the infrastructure, like nominal increases that were given in that big horrible bill cannot offset the cuts. And so that's where we are. It just like the math doesn't math, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
And turning to ICE real quick, I mean, we are in the middle of a partial government shutdown now of DHS and TSA agents are getting paid. That's making the headlines. Of course, the Senate passed a bill. The House, but you guys are gone now for another 2 weeks. So that's going to be in limbo again. First of all, do you support what the Senate passed, and would you vote yes if that was brought to the floor for vote?
Well, the bipartisan bill that passed by the Senate before we left is something I believe would have passed. There was enough pressure from our constituents to say we have to reopen TSA, but we have to rein in ICE. We have to come up with some basic safeguards. I was going to support that and fully intended to support that. I do have an issue with any extension. Aside from, I think that there is no organization that can continue to function with short little continuing resolutions to fund us. I don't know any organization that budgets this way that is successful. So that to me doesn't make any kind of sense. But I will not support something that will like single out ICE and CPP to get, you know, multiple years of funding when the rest of the government doesn't have that. So that is going to be problematic for me, especially if they do not put in some basic safeguards that every other law enforcement agency follows right now.
And you've been on the front lines of the ICE issue, obviously. Even Taco Euro, I think you were there that day.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
So now that Kristi Noem is out and Mark Wayne Mullen is in, have you noticed a change in tone, or do you think the ICE is heading in a direction that's going to be more digestible?
I don't think that we've seen any real significant changes. I just feel it's someone like handing a hat over to somebody else. If the policies stay the same, there will be no change. I did hear that there might be a pullback on continuing to purchase some of these warehouses that DHS was looking at buying. But really, what should be very concerning is the lack of transparency on what's happening when there is the increased number of people that have died in detention. We're up to 49. And what you're hearing from people that finally come out when there is no established process to do that, that is actually functioning very well at all. So we just had a shadow hearing, my office with Congresswoman Ansari, and had people come to speak at what is actually going on in detention. People with the Florence Project and a private attorney talking about what it's like to actually try to represent people the system is broken. It's
Yeah.
broken. And when people are dying because of a toothache, moms are being separated by their children, like states apart. There's something really broken we have to fix. And I don't believe that changing the leadership is going to address those things.
When you get back to Washington in 2 weeks, I think it's going to be difficult for Speaker Johnson to not bring this to a vote somehow, unless he's got another plan to carry his own bill or something. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, he did do that. He did do that right before we left. He recycled the same piece of legislation that has passed out of the House and died in the Senate multiple times. And so this is one of those examples where if you are a leader that is actually trying to get things done, you work together. If he tries to bring back the same piece of legislation that continues to fail in the Senate, what's going to happen is DHS, ICE, and CPP will continue to not have funding. And we will be in the same position again with a continuing resolution over Memorial when everyone is traveling again. And so, TSA is learning from having been shut down now 3 times since the, Trump 2.0, that if they call in earlier, then maybe there's some action. Because once TSA decides we're not coming to work because I don't know when I'm going to get paid, they still haven't been paid from back pay. And they're losing people. So it's not like a spigot that you can turn off and turn on. People are opting now to resign from working at TSA in order to find jobs that have more stability.
Yeah. Turning a little bit to your district, I mean, your district covers pretty much the whole border, going across from California to New Mexico practically. And kind of looking at both sides of it. I mean, one thing I think that Trump could wind up getting credit for in history is how his restrictive immigration policies could potentially improve the economy of Mexico and specifically northern Mexico. I guess the theory there would be if you don't have this big magnet sucking all the people up, to the U.S., you'll be able to build an economy locally, especially because you won't lose your skilled labor. It's a theory, but I was kind of wondering, I guess what you think about that, but being more than that, what you're seeing when you visit places. I'm especially thinking of like Nogales and Douglas, where the American side of the town is really kind of the inferior of the two. Douglas versus Agua Prieta is basically a bedroom community, and Nogales. What do you see happening there, especially economically? And then on the Mexican side, what's happening to the economies there of northern Mexico?
Well, lower numbers of border crossing don't equal better policy. So under Trump, reductions often come from making it harder for people to access legal pathways, pricing people out, increasing wait times, and pushing migration into more dangerous and hidden routes. The real question is impact, and I think that's what you're talking about. Policies that simply suppress crossings can't constrain border communities and families without fixing the system. And that's what I've seen in Nogales. That's what I saw in Bisbee yesterday, and having a roundtable with small business there. What is happening is that many of them are seeing a decrease in the number of international travels. And so when we're talking specifically about Mexico, and I've heard that strain where both of these sides are tied together. So many people that are U.S. citizens opt to live in Mexico because the cost of living is cheaper. And so their children, they work on this side of the border and cross back and forth. More and more, that's being strained. And fluctuations in places like Cochise County are driven up by seasonal patterns, regional dynamics, enforcement across multiple countries, not just one immigration administration or policy. And so this suppression is really also shows a failure of system, and both sides, I think, of the border are suffering from the economy. Their economies are suffering because of the push of tariffs, because of the overwhelming enforcement piece. Even people that are able to and have permission to cross back and forth, they see what's happening to their friends and family who also are green card holders and able to work here, and they're being detained. Nobody wants to have to deal with that because it could be months until they actually figure it out, until you have access to an attorney, until you're able to go through a really prolonged process. and eventually you're released. But in the meantime, you know, it devastates your family and your business. So I'm very concerned with other countries working around the United States. And I coincidentally last week had Canadian Parliament come to visit with me, and they said that the anti-US sentiment is something that they have never seen in their history, and that Canada does not want to work with the US. Well, guess who our number one importer exporter partner is? So that's why you're seeing the kinds of economic impacts that we have here in this country. It is this specific policy.
And speaking of those kind of day clusters, that's a kind of shows the kind of the bedroom communities that they are. You know, especially a place like Douglas, you have people living in Agua Prieta and working in Douglas. What's their has their travel been impacted? I know we're probably seeing fewer people in Sierra Vista come shop on weekends at Ross and Marshalls and things like that. Is that really frustrating, the flow of just not just commerce but day to day, the way these people have lived?
Well, absolutely. And also think about the number of US citizens that go across the border for medical care because of our system. It's getting harder and harder to do that. There are people that have been caught on the other side because of a reduction in CBP staff at the border, because they're being called to, you know, other, they're called to Minnesota or Texas or somewhere else for different immigration operations. And so, yeah, the impact is pretty significant, and they directly hurt US border businesses, which depend on Mexican shoppers and daily cross border traffic. And they don't really create stable gains in Mexico. Overall, they reduce economic activity by limiting mobility in what functions as a single regional economy. And so it's not something that's really easy to sort of say, well, Mexico will be better off or we'll be better off. It's like in a regional model, which we are, they rely on each other. So you might see some short-term shifts, like, you know, more spending staying in Nogales, Sonora or Agua Prieta, but that's not the same as like economic strengthening. It's a symptom of a reduced access and broken flow.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva. You will always go down in history as the first sitting congressperson to be on the Cochise County Sunday Roundtable. And maybe next time you're in town, let us know, and we can get you into our studio space and have another conversation that way. But thank you for your time, and happy Easter.
Thank you so much. Happy Easter.